Hi, everyone. How you doing? This is Mariano Gomez, and welcome to DynamicsCon 2022, our March event. And I want to first and foremost thank everyone at DynamicsCon for having me. And second, you, my audience, who have gracefully voted for my participation in this event. So thank you very much. I want to actually bring the following agenda to you today. Well, first and foremost, this is my session, Bring Microsoft Dynamics GP into the 21st century with Power Platform. Truly, it is any legacy system that you have on premises. So this just doesn't apply to Dynamics GP, but since we are here in this great event promoting GP, we will see GP as a base example. My name again is Mariano Gomez. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at McCorma Incorporated. We've been a long-time ISV in the Dynamics community. I'm also a Microsoft MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. And just to jump straight into the agenda, we're going to be talking about the on-premises data gateway, some installations and considerations, connecting to your on-premises data, how we do that with Power Platform, with the gateway, with some cool technologies in the cloud. We're going to also walk through some demos. So if you've been to any of my sessions before, you know that I'm not heavy on slides. So we should be talking about and demoing how you get the on-premises data gateway installed, building your first app, and performing some data operations with eConnect. Then I'll be available to you for a live Q&A at the end of the session. So make sure you stay tuned all the way to the end. And we're going to have the airwaves open for you to send in your questions. We'll be actually responding, me and I'm sure a whole bunch of fellow folks who like to join in to answer this type of questions in these events. The most important thing here that you have to consider is Power Platform is a set of cloud services. And in order to access the on-premises data, you're going to need some sort of capability on your on-premises network that allow you to do that. Primarily, the services that do allow you to access the on-premises data include Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Azure Analysis Services, and Azure Logic Apps. Keep in mind that that is done via the on-premises data gateway. That gateway acts as a bridge between the cloud services that we just described, and certainly in this case, your Microsoft Dynamics GP data that sits on Microsoft SQL Server. A little bit about the architecture of the gateway. So we've talked about how these cloud services have the ability to access your on-premise data, and that is done through a set of requests or queries. Those queries, along with your credentials, are encrypted on the cloud data and the cloud gateway, then sent through the Azure Service Bus. And once you've installed the application gateway here, that application gateway receives those credentials, receive the request, decrypts it, and send it out to the pertinent data source. In this case, Microsoft SQL Server, which is where our Microsoft Dynamics GP data resides. Once the request is completed, everything is packaged back and sent encrypted back to the service that requested it, and either displayed in the form of a report or the response of an app or workflow or a Logic Apps workflow as well. For those of you who are security conscious, this is done over TLS 1.2. So the encryption is done over TLS 1.2 and so on. Okay, there are some procedures for installing the gateway. First and foremost, you're going to download it. Then you're going to configure it. You're going to add some administrative groups through the folks that manage your network. And then you're going to troubleshoot any particular issue with that gateway. So as you know, that's basically the procedure. And, we'll demonstrate how that is done. So don't get too hung up on the slides right now. As far as considerations go, keep in mind that for Logic Apps, Power Apps, and Power Automate, they both support read and write operations through the gateway. Okay, or they all support read and write operations through the gateway. Those operations are done in 2 megabyte payload limits. So if you have a JSON package, which is how data is transmitted back and forth, that JSON package has a 2 megabyte payload limit. Read operations have a request limit between 2 megabytes and 8 megabytes in compressed data response limit. So if you send out a request that is 2 megabytes long, you can expect at least 8 megabytes in compressed data response. So that's just how the services are behaving, and that's kind of how the gateway operates in general. Okay, and overall, there's a 2048 character limit in any URL GET request that is done. So the only other thing here to keep in mind is that if you are using Power BI in direct query mode, there's a 16 megabyte uncompressed data response limit. So this is a little bit more than you would handle through Power Apps or Power Automate, but it's here in this case applicable to Power BI. So okay, so let's move forward. To connect to on-premises data, there are a couple things. You know, the secret sauce of the entire Power Platform are the connectors. There's over 400 plus connectors as of this session that I'm doing today. So you can go and research all of them. But in particular, there's the SQL Server Connector, which is the equivalent, if you want to put it somehow, to your ODBC driver in the cloud. So don't let this actually scare you from anything. Just know that you're gonna have to set up some sort of connection in the cloud that is specific to your SQL Server data. And as we saw from the previous slide deck, that's actually the connection that's gonna run on top of the gateway, and that's gonna interpret the data coming back and forth from SQL Server. So if we send out a query request, that is actually interpreted by the SQL Server Connector. And that request is packaged, sent down to your SQL Server. The queries then responds with the data that you requested, etc. This connector is published by Microsoft. It's available for Logic Apps, Power Automate, and Power Apps. There are some known issues, so you want to basically study this in detail, especially with triggers and actions. So just make sure that you are aware what those limitations are. I have a link right here. You can follow that to get that information. The beauty here is you can call eConnect stored procedures. Now, there are some best practices that I usually follow in order to call stored procedures, and that's to basically wrap those stored procedures in a stored procedure wrapper that basically minimizes the parameter scope and direct table operations. So if you can do everything, make sure you do it through stored procedures, especially if you're going to affect data in Microsoft Dynamics GP. You're going to want to do that through the Connect Stored Procedures because those are pre-built APIs for you. Okay. And while you can access tables directly, I do not recommend that, although there are certain exceptions. If you have to affect very specific and very contained pieces of data, then that's probably a good use, especially if you're doing things like Power Apps where you don't want to actually have to call a workflow. You will want to have specifically these operations being done directly on the tables. Again, be very conscious of that and follow best practices at all times. And here I have actually some resources for you. So if you actually want more information about the on-premises data gateway, what it is, how it works, you can come to this Microsoft Docs link and get some more information. We talked about the architecture. So you saw this, graphic in one of my slides. Just go read through any additional considerations for the gateway and the data sources and signing accounts and Active Directory, etc. Okay. Primarily, the first thing you will have to do is download the gateway. So here's the link to download it. And you will then click this download button. I'm not going to go through that operation because I already have it downloaded. So I'm going to go to my downloads folder here and double click on the gateway install application. So that's the executable that gets downloaded. You will want to either choose your own folder or accept the default. I typically accept the default and install this. So there's a couple prompts here that are not going to appear on your screen, but here they are until it starts the installation itself. All right, so that should be fairly quick. Keep in mind that while this is installing, that you have a number of things that you will have to prepare make sure you're reviewing the installation material before you go through this gateway. We'll walk through it here, but that should give us the ability then to set up everything. So the first thing is an email account. Typically, you will want this to be a service account, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to use my Azure Active Directory account or my Microsoft work account. So this is just for the purposes of this demonstration. Okay, but in speaking with your network engineers, you will want to use a service account for this. So this is actually now validating against my cloud services. In fact, the first thing here, since we have MFAs, I'm going to actually have to choose the MFA account I'm going to use. And that's perfectly fine. Now I have to register a new gateway on this computer. So I'm just going to click here next, because this is the first installation. But if I was doing things like migrating or restoring or taking over an existing gateway, you would have to choose this second option. You have to name your gateway. So I'm just going to give this the name Mariano Server. But keep in mind now that you can install the gateway on any computer, not necessarily your SQL Server, but you must have a properly configured TCP/IP network where the gateway have direct line of sight to your SQL Server machine. Okay, you can add the gateway to a cluster. And if you actually are going to do clusters, keep in mind that a cluster is nothing more than a collection of servers that are seen as one. And that's how they get registered on the services. We'll see that in a bit. So, but you can actually cluster the gateway, so you avoid having a single point of failure. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is set up a recovery key. And this is anything, so I'm just going to put in some name here. Okay, minimum 8 characters. Then I'm going to confirm that information and hit configure. So this takes a couple seconds to validate, nothing more, nothing else. And then the next thing you'll see here is that we have all the gateway now installed with all the services ready. Keep in mind that I don't have Logic Apps configured here. That's a set of Azure services. So I don't have those configured. If I wanted to, I could actually create a gateway in Azure for that and hook up to my Logic Apps and Azure Analysis services. But for now, what I'm interested in is that my Power Apps and Power Automate services are up and running, and my Power BI services are up and running. So the gateway is now enabled to take requests from those 3 platform services. A couple other things for those of you who are security concerned. So there are some network services here that allow you to enable this gateway in HTTPS mode. So then again, more security for you. You can also go back and change your recovery key, or see if you want to store custom data connectors where that information can be found at the gateway level. And there you go. So we're done with the installation of the gateway. That's good. Now, I'm going to show you how to configure both your SQL Server and your SQL Server Connector in order to begin taking requests from an app or through a workflow. So let's see that. The first thing I did here is in Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, I went ahead and set up a gateway proxy account. So that's think of this as the account that's going to be used to validate or to actually make the requests from the cloud to your SQL Server. We don't want that to be the SA account for obvious security reasons. And the other thing is we want to make sure that this account has just access to the necessary databases that we're going to be making those requests from. So if you go under user mapping here, you'll see that this is pointing to my system database. In some of your environments, that might be called Dynamics. In my particular environment, it's called Dyn 184. And you also have the Fabricam database. In my particular case, this one is called TW018. Now, as typical mapping goes, you got to make sure that this is also mapped to the Dyn group database role, security role, in order to be able to access your Dynamics GP tables and procedures and views, etc. Okay. So pretty simple. We have a gateway proxy account, and I specifically call it gateway proxy just to make it identifiable to any other person who's going to be administering my SQL Server. Okay. So the next thing we got to do now is set up a data connection. And that data connection is precisely what's going to allow me to reach my SQL Server from my cloud services. So if I click here on connections, I can set up a new connection. Note that I'm in my DCon environment, so my DynamicsCon environment, and I'm creating a new connection here. This is going to be a SQL Server connection. Keep in mind that the SQL Server is a premium connection, which means that you have to have, if you're going to use Power Apps, you're going to have a Power Apps per user or per app plan. Or if you're going to use Microsoft Flow or Power Automate, you're going to have a per flow or a specific plan that allows you to use that premium connector. Okay. So I'm just going to click here, SQL Server. There we go. In order to connect to your local SQL Server, you can use SQL Server authentication, Windows authentication, both shared and unshared. And this connector does allow you to also connect to Azure SQL, so you can use an Azure AD integrated account. So for all intents and purposes, and because we already have the account set up, we're going to use a SQL Server authentication. In this case, the SQL Server name, this I suggest you just make it the same name as your SQL Server. So if I just go hit properties here, I can copy out this information very easily and paste it over here on my SQL Server name. That just makes things easier for anybody who has to maintain this. And now for the SQL database name, I'm going to point this to TW18, which is my Fabricam database. But as you probably already know, you will be able to point this to any company database or even the system database if you have to have a specific request done on those databases. Okay. So as far as a username goes, again, remember that we did set up a logging account for that called Gateway Proxy. And that Gateway Proxy account is what we're going to use to authenticate here. So let me type this in. There we go, Gateway Proxy. And the password will be the password for that account. So whatever password you establish, that's a clear password, etc. The next thing I had to do here is choose the gateway connection. So this is probably going to fail authentication before I did it. But here's Mariano's server. And we'll just wait for this connection to be, this request to be canceled at some point. Now, just to recap quickly here, this was expected. So just to recap quickly here, we install our gateway, we set up our connection, we point now that connection makes use of this specific gateway, and now I can hit create. That should work because I now have the correct gateway set up. So it's good that these things happen while we're working. That way you can see how things are established. Now the connection is created, it points to the database and it tells me what server. So that's the reason why you want to make sure that you set up specific names for these things that allow it to be identified pretty quickly. All right, so we have our gateway set up, we have our SQL Server Connector set up, we set up our proxy account. Now we're in good shape to go ahead and do the next part of our session, which is getting you started with setting up an app. I want to call your attention to a couple things here. If I go back to home, this is actually very new. This flows option is pretty new with the latest Wave 1 release for 2022. So it does allow me to do some interesting things. I don't have to go to flow.microsoft.com. I can do everything from here directly from the Power Apps surface. So pretty cool. Just thought I would mention that. But we're here to create our first app. So note that in order to build apps, you can start from a blank app, from Dataverse, from SharePoint, from Excel. But guess what? You can also start from SQL Server. So this is pretty cool because it saves us a lot of time by creating a simple, quick app that has 3 screens already defined for you, where all you have to do is go and make simple changes to make it work at the end of the day. All right, so we start by a connection. So note that this is the connection that I just created a couple seconds ago. So I'm going to click on that connection. And the simple app that I'm going to create is a simple customer maintenance application. Very quick, based on the information that is specifically in the RM00101 table. So if you see this, you know that we're working with Dynamics GP. And at the end of the day, this connection is now working by grabbing the information that's on my on-premises SQL Server, including table names, etc. So I'm just going to click this table and hit connect here quickly. Then you'll see now that the magic built into Power Apps is going to infer the data in that table and then build us a quick app with 3 screens. Very, very elegant, and something that you don't have to worry about. So again, while that happens, I'm just going to go over here to Microsoft Dynamics GP, click on Sales, and this is the same information that we have in our Customer Master. We're just going to expose that to a simple Power Apps application that we're building. So as you can see, the application is being built very quickly here based on the information that is in the RM00101. And actually, what I like about this is the application is already functional, even with the little bit of information that is presenting. So for the uninitiated, we can quickly go here and change this to customers, because we don't want this to have, random application type names. Okay, we're gonna then go and change our data information here. So as you can see, the title 1 is blank. So we probably want to make this the customer name instead of address 1. So we're going to change that to cost name. So there we go. Now this is starting to look like something we recognize. So we can change this address 2, and we're just going to bring address 1 here. And finally, instead of address 3, we might want to have a phone number. So we're going to do that phone 1. Now, just because of the way Microsoft Dynamics GP handles, information stored in phone numbers, you could actually decide to format this differently. But we're not going to go through all that right now. And then what we're going to do rather is making sure that we have all the proper information in place. Now, because I changed the different sorting options or the different field names, I want to probably make this equally something that I can change here in different sorting orders. And you can see that the application immediately is going to make those changes for me as well. And I want it searchable by customer name by default. So as I keep doing this, note that now everything is reorganized, and then this is now starting to look like an app. I can always use the play button here to test this out and go to the following information screen, and you will see that that brings up everything that I need about this. So we can go here and make the changes as well. So instead of calling this RM001, we want to probably call this customer detail. And we can change these labels and the cards information, etc. But that's probably not what I want to do right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the branch. So we're going to edit the field list. And I can quickly how to remove this and add a field called phone 1. So that's the field that we want to expose, add that out, and we're good to go. Okay. So now there's also the edit screen, which is by default placed on the list of screens. So we're going to edit this, remove this branch field as well, and add the phone field. So we can filter this by just typing phone 1. Okay. All right. So now we have all our fields. Let's just see how this behaves then. So I'm going to go back to the main screen, the browse screen 1, and I'm going to play it from here. So if I want to go to Aaron Fit, you can see that this is the phone. We want to edit this and probably go and change. Let's say the phone wasn't 101, but 201. We can then click on Submit Item. Oh, all this information is required. I'm just going to fill it out quickly. And these are things that you can change as a user, whether a field is required or not. But this will actually make a lot of sense for you if you see it in action. Okay. So I'm going to now hit submit, and hopefully this will show you what we did. So there we go. So now the phone number is 201, is refreshed. But if we go to Dynamics GP and we actually move off this record and come back, you'll see now that address 2, 3 are tests. We actually have the phone number as well, should be formatted properly. So if we look at the phone number here on the address card, actually going back, we can see that this also changed to 201. So all these changes are done from the app that I just created. And that shows you very quickly, very succinctly how these changes can be done and how you can quickly create an application that uses and leverages in this case, Power Apps, to make a quick customer maintenance screen. Just imagine you had this a few months ago when we were under lockdown and you didn't have the ability to use the Dynamics GP web client that kind of like what I have here. This would have been something that would have helped a lot of companies out there to get through the first probably months of COVID when we were under lockdown, and certainly companies didn't have the infrastructure in place to make, or deploy Dynamics GP remotely. So keep things in mind as we go along here that you can definitely make some changes. So I'm going to do a quick recap here. So first things first, you install the gateway. And if you go to on-premises data gateway here, this is the data gateway that we installed here over here on the screen. So keep in mind that the gateway is downloaded from Microsoft, right? Once you install the gateway, you will then set up your proxy account that you're going to use to authenticate. In this case, I set up the gateway proxy here. And that gateway proxy account has mappings to Dyn Group and each one of the databases that are in each one of the company databases or even the system database that I want to expose to it. Okay. And then the next thing you would do is set up your connection here under make.powerapps.com. If you go to connections, that's probably on a different screen, but you get the point. You will be able to use the connection that you set up. That connection is a SQL Server connection, which is a premium connector. As such, you need to have the proper Power Apps or Power Automate licenses for that connection. And then you can leverage Power Apps quick application template or application resources to basically build a quick application. Now you can beautify this, you can make changes to it. For example, if I wanted to change that card, I would then have to just edit this and certainly unlock that control, right? So I would have to unlock the control and make it available to make those changes. So I can just do a customer number here, for example. Okay. Same thing here. If I wanted this to say address, we can make those changes on the fly. All right. So that's very powerful in order to build an application. So the last thing I wanted to cover is how do you leverage this with a flow? But first, in order to do anything in Power Apps, remember that you need to save your app. So we can call this customer maintenance. Okay. And save this app. Once we save it, we then get the ability to publish it and share it with our peers. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. There's some versioning here that you can keep track of, etc., but we're not going to get too detailed into that right now. We're done for now. So what we want to do is want to close this up and go back to home here. Now, running stored procedures or executing stored procedures, especially the eConnect stored procedures, can be done through Microsoft Flow. So if I click a new flow here and I set up, let's say, an instant cloud flow, we can then set up a You can even use Power Apps as a trigger, but I'm going to use a manual trigger for now and call this, customer update, right? So we can do a create here. And the next step that I'm going to do then is I'm going to look for the SQL Server Connector. And this is important. I want to show it here because it will help you understand the advantages that you can, the advantages that you have while executing stored procedure. So if you do execute stored procedure, again, you will be able to select. Look at this. My connection appears here instantly in the connector itself. I can choose the database, in this case, the one used by the connector. But note that now I can scan through the list of stored procedures that are available in the database, and those same TA stored procedures do appear here. The TA stored procedures are all UE Connect stored procedures. Okay, so it gives you the ability to then use these stored procedures in the context of Power Automate. Now, you cannot call stored procedures from Power Apps itself. So if you must update a customer record, you will probably have to change the strategy of how you would make that update by invoking a flow from Power Apps. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a little bit more on the realm of what I would call Power Apps Power Automate 102. So not something I want to show here, but I just wanted to give you the idea that you can definitely call all these eConnect stored procedures. Now, there's one thing to keep in mind here. And I'm going to just choose one single stored procedure in this place. But if I wanted to create, let's say, create an item class, okay? What this is going to do is it's going to look up for all the different parameters for that stored procedure. And what I want you to keep in mind here is that you might not be interested in, first and foremost, if you did go this route, you would have to actually fill in every single parameter. So what is customary is that you look at the TA create IV item class, and what you do in SQL Server then is set up a new query here where you're going to actually now write a wrapper stored procedure for that one. So you can say something like create procedure, update customer as, or then you can say, set up your parameters, customer number, right? Then you can set up something that you want to update, let's say the phone number, okay? So this stored procedure could be something as, a call to the standard eConnect procedure. So you can say something like exec TA create customer. Let's see if I do recall what that is. Let's assume this is the procedure we're talking about. So the bottom line now is you can actually minimize the parameter count by just invoking the standard parameters that you want to use in the stored procedure. So that minimizes the scope. Now, instead of calling this procedure that has 15 parameters, you can call your update customer that has 2 parameters and passes in just those 2 parameters to that TA create procedure, where you can also go back and default the parameters that are not being used, or you can actually make calculations before you invoke the parameter, and then a number of options that you have available by using SQL Server. Now, this might be outside the realm of your standard knowledge. So if you're not familiar with SQL Server stored procedures, just work with your partner, with your Microsoft Dynamics GP partner, or work with your internal development staff to help you out with these things. So those are great resources for you. And I just wanted to make sure that I showed you how this works from both Power Automate, in this case over here, where you could invoke those stored procedures and pass in the parameters to them as you would make a call in SQL Server or in any other application development environment where you could call a stored procedure. So That said, I'm going to go back to my slide deck. We talked about creating the SQL Cloud connection, building your first app, performing operations with connectors. So if you actually wanted to get in contact with me, find out a little bit more about these things in detail, you can contact me on Twitter. My account is DGP Blogster. You can also contact me on YouTube. I have quite a bit of videos on using Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents, Power Apps with Microsoft Dynamics GP and on-premises data in overall. Or you can actually contact me on LinkedIn by going to my profile, which is in/Mariano Gomez Bent. So I'm happy to be here. Remember, I'll be taking questions live after this presentation. And I want to make sure that at least you got the fundamentals for how you would interact with Microsoft Dynamics G on-premises data with cloud services like Power Apps, Power Automate, or even Power BI. So thank you very much. And I'll be talking to you guys after this last click. There you go.